Apple is asking a pretty interesting question with what might be the most unique smartphone of this year's release cycle. To be fair, this is not a question they haven't asked before, but I'd argue that now there's more context, and indeed, the kind of technology now that was needed to make something like this a reality. The question is, what exactly do you need from your smartphone? It's a question that a tech content creator like me is constantly trying to answer, but it's at times like this that I'm constantly reminded of a potentially uncomfortable truth. I may not be who this is meant for. But for all of the needs that I might have as a unique type of user, I can't help but be enamored by this interesting blend of cutting-edge tech and what feels like a presentation of tech minimalism. After all, what happens when Apple strips away all of the things that they think simply aren't important for most people? What you get is a phone that is quite literally and definitely figuratively lighter than air, for better or worse. Hey, it's Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? This right here is the iPhone Air Day 1. Now, with a lot of projects and looming travel during this Techtember and Techtober, I ended up unboxing my purchased iPhone Air quite a while after the device pickup. So I'll let that play out after I quickly thank all of you for hanging out with me again today as the iPhone content starts slamming your feeds. Thanks for coming to hear what I have to say on this phone, and if you want to keep up with everything I have planned for the new Apple releases, make sure you subscribe to my channel. Also, your likes and comments do help the channel out a lot, so please do sound off with your thoughts on this phone as well. Now that the phone has been set up and all that, I want to make a declaration that I'm sure some of you are thinking. This is not the first time we're seeing a super thin smartphone. It's been done a number of times on the Android side, most recently with the Samsung Galaxy S25 Edge, which I actually have somewhere over there. And that was a bit of a surprise because the minimalist light smartphone ended up staying in my pocket for quite some time. And I think that that's going to happen with this iPhone Air because I have many of the same feelings after using this phone, even after just a few hours. Alright, so for all of you, let's say number crunchers out there, this is a phone that comes in at 165 grams while still having a 6.5-inch display and a battery capacity just shy of 3,200 milliamp hours. Obviously, the first hours of setting up a phone include downloading all of the apps and signing into everything, and all of that is a big battery suck, so I'm going to reserve my battery life thoughts for a later video. Connecting the all-new AirPods Pro 3 and installing all of my apps was interrupted with me simply getting a good feel of the iPhone Air, and it's hard not to always feel like this phone is something special simply from gripping it. Earlier, I've mentioned how we've come to this point partly because we finally have the technology to make this happen. Well, part of that comes down to the continued shrinking of high-powered tech like processors and batteries, but it also has to do with a move from physical over to digital. Yeah, I'm talking about the eSIM. Gone are the SIM trays in every iPhone Air, removing what was once considered a crucial component that could either thicken the design of a smartphone or simply take up space that could be used for other things. To me, that's like the obvious first sign of what Apple may feel like many of its users will or will not need, and I'd like to know where all of you stand in the comments. Is eSIM finally viable for most of you, or do you live somewhere that still runs more or less on physical SIMs? You see, it's an interesting question because if we're going to look at the iPhone Air as a type of innovation in the world of tech, we should ponder the implications of the choices that were made in order to create this innovation. But before we get a little too existential, let's talk about what Apple might deem essential. Obviously, that's going to be day-to-day use. And in that regard, there is now the technology to provide the majority of what most people would use on the daily in such a thin package. That's because of things like the A19 Pro processor that is also found on the mainline iPhone 17 phones, and the 6.5-inch Super Retina XDR display that does support the dynamic island, always-on capabilities, and ProMotion 120Hz refresh rate. Those are a lot of features that just a year or two ago were all basically expected to be found primarily on the Pro models. But now, Apple is here going along with the trend of redefining what a base model phone could be. That being said, the iPhone Air is far from basic, and I think that's kind of the point. Going back to one of my previous points, we now have context as to why a phone like this can actually exist. In the past, Apple put on their, let's say, nostalgia hats and asked their users to evaluate what they truly needed out of their smartphones, and they thus released a couple of editions or generations of this, the iPhone SE. It was clear that these phones, the iPhone SE I'm talking about, were not meant to be considered as part of the main line, and perhaps it's with that similar sentiment that the iPhone Air should be considered. But of course, Apple is over here taking off the nostalgia hat because the iPhone Air is way closer to the mainline siblings than the SE models ever were. But still, There's no 17 here. This is called Air. And there are a couple of other places where just the right stripping away of features and hardware gave way to the concept of an Air device. That would of course be the iPad Air and the MacBook Air. The MacBook Air is the one that really stuck out in my mind because it's also where we got the concept of we now have the technology, and I'm talking of course about Apple Silicon. With some creativity and usage and maybe some help from extra tools, the MacBook Air proves itself as an option that stands on its own. So could the iPhone Air achieve the same? Seriously, these are all thoughts that I was having in the hours that followed me unboxing the phone, really. And then, after getting a ton of other work done, it was the next day, and I had to get out of the apartment for a little while. I decided to head to my usual spot for camera samples, the LA Arboretum, where I was about to have a pretty short time testing out the camera of the iPhone Air. Now, like I say in a couple of clips here, this is not a full-on camera test, but it almost might as well be because there's just one 48 megapixel camera on the rear with an updated center stage front camera that might prove useful for a lot of social media creators. Here's an interesting feature that I just noticed. I know that the front-facing cameras on all of the iPhone 17 models, but also the iPhone Air here, they've been updated so that they can cover a lot more aspect ratio ranges rather, no matter what orientation you have the phone in. I'm holding the phone vertically right now and I'm still able to get this wide shot, this widescreen shot, landscape shot, whatever you want to call it. It does make actually getting this video a little bit easier, and it's still at 4K at 30 frames, so maybe it's a feature I might use a little bit more often. Clearly, this is where there had to be concessions to go from Pro to Base and then, well, to Air. But it might be a little harder to justify the move to something lighter and thinner when you might also be getting something less capable. And one of the most obvious places where that can be seen is right here in the cameras. Now, I'm not doing a full-on camera test with the iPhone Air, not just yet. I kind of want to take this one camera here, well, technically two, obviously you have the front-facing camera. I want to take this more simplified camera package and bring it somewhere like a travel scenario so that we can really see what it's like to just have a more essentials smartphone. That's kind of what the iPhone Air is trying to present, is a smartphone that just has exactly what you need and not too much else. After all, the iPhone 17 lineup has all of the telephotos and the ultra wides and a bunch of extra things, but those are obviously thicker smartphones. And I think it's kind of indicative of the reason why iPhone Air is named the way that it is. It's not trying to be part of the 17 lineup, it is trying to be something all on its own. So probably it's no surprise that you're not going to be zooming into a whole lot of, let's call it wildlife, nature, whatever the case may be, as I'm here at the LA Arboretum where, as it turns out, there's a wedding going on. That's a first. I actually have never seen that happen here, and I think it's a pretty cool venue for that kind of thing. In any case, zooming into some of the animals and nature that is around here, like the ducks or the geese or anything like that, not really going to happen too easily on here, at least not in a way that is super clear. You can get to the 2x without much loss in quality, and there are a couple of zoom ranges in the middle that allow for around 28 or 35 millimeters as far as the focal lengths are concerned. But then once you go past that 2x, it just starts to get kind of muddy, and that's to be expected with a digital zoom. Getting all the way to the 10x does get you pretty far, but there are plenty of other phones that sport true telephoto lenses that can get you perfect optical quality using actual hardware. This is just harder to hide or maybe look past on a smartphone as compared to on a laptop or a tablet. This is also another place where the iPhone Air seems to veer a little bit more into SE territory, but then Apple makes a good choice in making sure that the 48 megapixel sensor on here is a good one. I'm having a tiny bit of an aha moment though. There have been plenty of other phones that sport multiple lenses or sensors on the rear that I end up saying the main sensor is the one that you will want to use the most. It provides the most bokeh, or rather shallow depth of field. It obviously is going to have the largest sensor in that regard, and it might be the one that you want to use as much as possible to make sure that the quality is as high as possible. One of the main things that I think is really interesting is that they still managed to provide the camera control button over on the side. You also get the action button on the other side near the top of the phone, but it is with the camera control that you can do like a light press before actually clicking on that button in order to change a few settings if you choose to. I originally thought that's something that I wanted, but since I can get a really easy grip around the phone, I'm finding myself accidentally changing up my exposure values when using the camera. So it got got a little bit annoying to have to like change it every time I wanted to get another shot. I went back in the settings and made sure that the camera control light press settings were turned off. Well, at the very least, there is a way to have the exposure values just sort of sticking around on the camera interface in a little button that's over in the corner. So I can just go ahead and pop that up and go down to the negative 0.7 that I usually put it at, maybe 0.3. And the camera does let you keep the exposure value locked in so that when you leave the camera and come back to it, it sticks around. The obvious omissions, like missing sensors and lenses, are coupled with all that is missing underneath that surface. Things like recording with Pro Codecs, with a log profile, or recording in Open Gate. Now, if all of that terminology just went over your head, there's a line drawn there between people who might need the Pro features and, well, those of you who might not. And it's pretty obvious what side I stand on. But I will admit, there are some shots that I'm seeing here that I wish I could get just like even better quality zoom shots with it. And also, in the case of the scene right in front of me, having a wide angle, an ultra wide angle on here would be definitely quite useful to just capture this entire scene. And then I come to aha moment number 2, because if I don't have the hardware to be able to get some of those particular types of shots, well, there are some tools available in the software. Pano. I can't remember the last time I actually used a panoramic mode inside of the camera app, and well, I just did that in order to achieve that super wide angle view that I was talking about a second ago. Well, I guess what is old is new again. At least in this case, you have pretty good hardware when it comes to the one sensor you have on the phone. Heading back from the Arboretum, I was able to take advantage of other features that you almost wouldn't think fit in a phone this thin. Qi 2 compatible wireless charging and MagSafe. Also, updated CarPlay that I'll use more in my brand new Ioniq 5 Limited wirelessly. Although that's more of an upgraded feature of the car than the phone. And as far as MagSafe goes, I'm taking full advantage with an O-Snap. A caseless iPhone Air with a matching O-Snap? Yeah, that seems like it'll be a good time. And that's the thing about the iPhone Air. It makes me want to use it under an interesting dichotomy. In a way, it's asking me to embrace having less in a new piece of tech that is kind of trying harder than ever. And I think it's because of that duality that I feel like the iPhone Air is pretty significant in this year's Apple lineup, because it serves not just as a proving ground that the everyday essentials can be covered in such a light way, but for everyone else that looks at this iPhone Air and wants it or opines for it, but simply can't let go of the extra tools that justify a Pro, well, the pros are right there. And Apple did well to make sure that those Pro phones feel like actual impactful upgrades for the first time in a while. So half the people get to witness and possibly even live a minimalist shift in the technology zeitgeist, while others can happily double down on maxing out on Pro features. Those are some shrewd moves, Apple, but I commend them for it. I do realize that most of this day one video has been spent just sort of pondering the implications of this product, but really the kind of experience that the iPhone Air provides is not far from what you would expect from a proper Apple offering. But I will have to use it a little bit more to give proper perspective on things like Apple Intelligence and Visual Intelligence, if I could just, it's actually working right now, Visual Intelligence, there you go, by holding down the other button or using the action button up here. And of course, I have to talk a little bit more about the updated apps and Liquid Glass. I have to admit, I'm not too sure what to think of this new design language. The philosophy that design elements should be fluid and easily accessible by putting many of them on the bottom third of the phone, I think that's good. But the bubbliness of it all and all the transparent elements are still throwing me off a little bit. I gotta get into some real personalization with the iPhone Air, and that will take some time familiarizing myself with all of the options, new and old, including having like the big clock for lock screen wallpapers and finding out what icon look I really want. All of that will come in due time, and it's all things that I can actually talk about in my iPhone 17 Pro content, coming soon. And so, there you have it. A rather existential look at the iPhone Air after day one. When Apple goes for a really big swing, it's really hard not to ponder on it because Apple doesn't make moves without a fair bit of confidence. And whether or not that confidence is unfounded depends on your perspective, and that's where I want to pass all of these thoughts over to you. What do you think about the iPhone Air? Did you get one? How is it working out for you so far? Let me know in the comments. Simply put, I have to think about how the iPhone Air basically requires me to lighten the load in order to lighten the load. But from there, I'm gonna go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for kicking it with me again today. Please take care of yourselves and each other, and enjoy your tea, everybody.